Hi everyone, I'm Doug Becker. I'm a pastor here at Emergence, and today I'd like to share a few thoughts about the familiar story of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is the final thing that Jesus does before he is arrested and goes to the cross. I'm looking at the version given to us in Mark chapter 14, beginning in verse 32, so you're welcome to follow along with me if you'd like. And there's a lot that can be said about this, about what happens here, but I'd like to focus on what this discloses about Jesus' humanity. Because throughout the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is presented as understandably a larger-than-life figure, and he's spoken several times about going to Jerusalem and what will happen to him there, and in tune with his normal confidence in this gospel. When he does so, it's very resolute, I'm going to go do this, and almost brave and very accepting of what will happen to him. So, for example, in Mark chapter 9, verse 31, he tells his disciples, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and when he is killed, after 3 days he will rise." Likewise, a very similar prediction a chapter later in chapter 10, verses 33 and 34. Notice he even refers to himself in the third person as the Son of Man. This is like almost sounds like triumphant, and that's obviously a part of the way that Jesus conceived of what he was doing, and it's not wrong for him to think of it like that. But here in Gethsemane, we get a much different side of Jesus, this Jesus whom we worship, and that is his humanity. His fear of what's going to happen to him. So he takes his three closest disciples, that's Peter, James, and John, and brings them into the garden and tells them to stay there and watch and to pray for themselves, right? Because especially Peter, he's already predicted that Peter will betray him 3 times. And so he wants Peter to be praying for himself even. But Jesus goes off by himself to pray, as he often does. And this is kind of, again, dripping with these remarks about how human Jesus was and what was actually going on in his heart now that the hour had come. So Mark tells us in verse 33 that he began to be greatly distressed and troubled. Think about how forceful that language is. And then in the next verse, in verse 34, he says to his disciples, out of Jesus' own mouth, he says, "My soul is sorrowful, even to the point of death." Okay, and then he goes to pray, and he falls on his face. He falls on the ground, which is not the normal posture for prayer. Normally, prayer in those days, especially like even with Jesus, is arms lifted up towards heaven. But here, it's prostrate on the ground, and he begins to pray a prayer to the Father. "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." Okay, and that's Mark's summary of Jesus' words. Jesus prays essentially the same thing 3 times, but that's what Mark wants us to know about what Jesus is asking here. And notice here, he's praying a prayer that he knows won't come to pass, and yet he prayed it anyway because that's where his heart was at. And and God wants us to be honest with him, right? Like if that's where our heart is at, he wants to hear it. You're not going to hide it from him when you go to him in prayer. And Jesus knew this, and this is how Jesus prayed, very transparently before God. And I kind of think of it like this. The reality of what's going to happen has really sunk in for him, like the fear of everything that's going to happen to him, the fear of everything that you or I would fear about knowing that we would be crucified, knowing that there would be metal spikes driven through our arms and our legs with no respect to bone, and that we would be hung by there until we were dead. that dread of knowing that that's only hours away is there in Jesus's heart, and he's afraid. Him and his full humanity, right? Jesus is fully man and fully God, and both of those are upheld here. And also, I think it's interesting too that another aspect of his humanity, which kind of sets a pattern for us, is the affection towards the Father in his time of need. And this is kind of like what I want to end on, but note how he refers. So Jesus commonly refers to the Father as Father in his prayers. But one thing, this is the only place in the Gospels that this word appears. It appears a few other times in the New Testament, but he doesn't just call him Father, he calls him Abba, Father. Okay, which sometimes it's said that that's roughly equivalent to daddy. Okay, not really. This is an Aramaic term, which Mark chooses not to translate. Jesus speaks Aramaic. This is exactly the word that he would have used. But it doesn't really mean daddy, because it's not childish or cute in any kind of way, but it is this term of endearment, this term of affection that you would use towards your earthly father. Okay. And it's as if Jesus is clinging to the Father's feet and begging him. And the fact that Mark left it untranslated for us means that he wants us to pick up on that. He wants us to pick up on this close family relationship that Jesus is clinging to in his hour of need. Just as Paul says that God has given us the Spirit in our hearts so that we can view God as Abba, Father, so that we can cry Abba, Father, so Jesus is doing this now in his hour of need. But nevertheless, he is resolute in submitting to his Father's will. Not my will, but yours be done. And so he kind of gives us a model of our attitude when we're going through things that we're genuinely afraid of, right? You've got this honesty before the Father. Like, don't try to hide it from God. You can't hide where your heart is at from God. And what he wants is your heart. Like, just read the Psalms, right? They're full of people pouring their heart out in fear and anguish before God. Know also that it's okay to pray for deliverance. Even if you think it's unlikely that it will happen, even if you somehow know it won't happen, right? Like, God, again, that's where your heart's at, and God wants to hear that. But couple all of that with not my will, but your will be done, as Jesus does. And that, of course, Jesus' willingness to fully submit to his Father, even in his greatest hour of need and greatest hour of fear and sorrow, is ultimately what brings about our salvation and his glorification. And so, just a couple of reflections on Jesus' humanity from the Garden of Gethsemane. Okay, have a great day, and we'll see you around.